Their eyes study you, desperate to decode what keeps you untouched by the storms that rattle them. They expect cracks, signs of struggle, a glimpse of weakness to feed their illusions. But you do not give them what they want. Instead, you laugh. Not the laughter of mockery, not the laughter of cruelty, but the kind of laugh that comes from someone who has already seen too much to be shaken by little games. That laugh unsettles them more than silence ever could. They realize in that moment that their entire structure of assumptions was fragile, and your amusement is the hammer that smashes it into fragments. They believed they could contain you inside their story. They painted you in their imagination as someone who would break easily, someone who would crumble under whispers, betrayal, or doubt. They built illusions around you to make themselves feel taller, safer, and more in control. But illusions are weak against reality, and your laughter is reality personified. It reminds them that all the control they thought they had over you was an illusion too. They cannot accept that you are moving forward without needing their approval. They stare wide-eyed because the collapse of their narrative is louder than any word you could speak. Psychology teaches that people cling to illusions to protect themselves from facing truth. They thought you were trapped, but that was their illusion, not yours. They thought they could predict you, but that was their illusion, not yours. They thought you needed them, but that was their illusion, not yours. When you laughed, it wasn't only at their schemes. It was at the idea that they ever believed they were strong enough to shape your story. You shattered their comfort zone by reminding them that the only power they had was the one you allowed them to believe in. In relationships, illusions are built quickly. They believed they could mask indifference with charm, disguise self-interest with affection, and present control as love. You saw through it quietly. You didn't confront with rage. You simply built yourself until their illusions had no space left to survive. When your laughter filled the air, it was not cruelty. It was liberation. It was the sound of someone who had walked through deception, carried the weight of false promises, and chosen to rise beyond them. They looked at you in disbelief because illusions die hard, and they had lived inside theirs for too long. They are addicted to watching you because they are trying to resolve a question that eats at them. How can someone they underestimated walk through fire without scars? The truth is simple. You stopped fighting illusions on their terms. You stopped explaining yourself to those who never listened. You stopped bending to stories that weren't yours. Instead, you laughed because you understood the game. The only way to shatter illusions is to stop feeding them. And once you refused to participate, the walls they built around you collapsed into dust. In self-growth, illusions often come disguised as shortcuts, overnight success, or easy answers. They believed you would tire out, quit, or expose cracks when the process became lonely. But you stayed with the silence. You stayed with the slow climb, the grueling repetitions, the nights without applause. That is why your laugh stings them so deeply. It is not arrogance, it is survival. It tells them you endured what they could not, and you found joy in the very place they ran from. Their eyes remain fixed on you because they are trying to understand how you turned struggle into strength. The irony is that your laughter becomes their teacher. It exposes their illusions without words. They thought strength came from performance. You proved it comes from presence. They thought winning meant being seen. You proved it meant being unshaken. They thought power meant control over others. You proved power begins with control over yourself. And because they cannot argue with the evidence, they are forced to face the truth that their illusions were never real. There is cruelty in laughter when it is born from freedom, because it does not fight illusions directly. It erases them by existing. They cannot comprehend how you are still standing, still calm, still growing, while everything they relied on falls apart. They watch because they hope for explanation, but none comes. You don't owe them a breakdown of how you became this way. Your presence is the explanation. Your laughter is the punctuation. Their illusions are the ashes left behind. They fear the sound of that laugh because it represents what they cannot fake. Illusions can mimic confidence, but they cannot survive under pressure. Illusions can mimic strength, but they cannot hold weight. Illusions can mimic control, but they cannot face storms. Your laugh cuts through them all. It is not an act, not a disguise, not a mask. It is real. And reality, no matter how quiet, always wins against fantasy. They sprinted into conversations like gamblers at a table, betting everything on the thrill of being noticed. They wanted every word to land, every gesture to sting, every move to be applauded. Recognition was their drug, and exchanges were their stage. The louder they tried to prove themselves, the more transparent they became. You sat back and let them show all their cards, because patience exposes what performance tries to hide. They believed volume meant strength, but it only revealed desperation. Their cleverness turned into a routine, predictable and dull, because anything rehearsed too often loses its power. They thought unpredictability came from speed, as if rushing gave them an edge. But speed without thought is chaos, and chaos always betrays itself. You slowed the game. You didn't need to show everything at once. You let silence do the heavy lifting. They grew restless with your stillness, mistaking it for weakness, when in reality you were watching them script their own downfall. The faster they moved, the easier it became to know their next step. You didn't have to outplay them. You only had to wait. In relationships, they rushed to display affection, rushed to display control, rushed to prove superiority. They believed grand gestures, dramatic reactions, and quick performances could hide a lack of depth. But the more they showed, the less believable it became. You didn't compete with theatrics. You allowed them to exhaust themselves in proving their importance. And when the moment came where consistency was required, they were already empty. The desperate always reveal themselves, because desperation cannot sit still long enough to stay hidden. They were intoxicated with the idea of being perceived as clever. They wanted applause in every room, validation in every glance. They mistook cleverness for wisdom, mistook reaction for influence. You didn't care for that shallow recognition. You played for the long impression, the one that lingers even in silence. That's why their cleverness faded, while your presence grew heavier with time. People remembered you not because you demanded it, but because you left echoes that required no explanation. Psychology explains that those who rush reveal their anxieties more than their strengths. Their constant need to prove themselves was not confidence. It was insecurity dressed as performance. You recognized it instantly. Every rushed word was a plea. Every hurried move was a signal of fear. They believed they were hiding their weakness with cleverness. But weakness revealed itself in the very pace they kept. You didn't need to expose them. They exposed themselves with every desperate attempt to be seen. In self-growth, they jumped from one goal to the next, rushing to announce progress, rushing to showcase transformation. They mistook momentum for mastery. You moved slower but deeper. While they posted their illusions of change, you built real change in silence. That's why when pressure came, their supposed growth collapsed while yours endured. Their predictability wasn't just in words, it was in patterns. Every time things got hard, they fled to another distraction. You stayed. You endured. And endurance always outlasts speed. They believed attention was power, but attention is fragile. It fades the moment something louder arrives. You never chased it. You didn't need the room to witness your cleverness, because your focus wasn't on being seen. It was on building something undeniable. And when the dust cleared, the same people who clapped for their performances were looking at you with respect they couldn't manufacture. That was the difference. They wanted eyes. You wanted permanence. They rushed because they couldn't stand silence. Silence felt like death to them. You lived in silence because you understood it as a weapon. In silence, you studied. In silence, you prepared. In silence, you let them grow addicted to the spotlight until it blinded them. And when the lights dimmed, they were lost, predictable and desperate for another chance to be noticed. Meanwhile, you didn't need light to move. You carried your own fire. Their cleverness lost its edge because it was overused. Every performance looked the same. Every tactic was recycled. People began to see through it, even if they didn't say it aloud. But you knew. You saw the pattern long before the crowd did. You saw the cracks forming, the desperation intensifying. Predictability is the death of power. And the tragedy is they created their own predictability by never knowing when to hold back. You, on the other hand, built unpredictability by refusing to rush. You didn't reveal every thought, every move, every plan. You let mystery guard your steps. While they flooded the room with noise, you gave the room silence to wonder. That wondering became your weapon. They tried to control perception by oversharing. You controlled it by undersharing. And that is why they became predictable, while you became unreadable. They lived for reaction, but reaction made them easy to track. You lived for restraint, and restraint made you impossible to corner. They wanted to look clever in moments, but you wanted to remain untouchable across time. That's why their cleverness burned out while yours grew sharper. Their need for recognition exposed every weakness. Your refusal to need it exposed every strength. There's cruelty in laughter when it is born from freedom, because it cuts deeper than any insult or weapon. They expect pain to look heavy, to sound bitter, to carry resentment in its tone. But when you laugh after everything they tried to chain you with, that sound becomes unbearable to them. They realize your freedom is untouchable. Your laughter tells them their power has dissolved, that nothing they did can hold you anymore. It shows that what once haunted you is now a memory you can mock. To them, that sound is cruel because it confirms they failed. To you, it is release, a reminder that you carried weight, broke free, and now wear scars as medals instead of wounds. They stare at you because they cannot reconcile the sound of your laugh with the chains they thought were still wrapped around your wrists. They wanted silence from you. Silence soaked in defeat, silence that admitted they won. Instead, they hear laughter, a melody that refuses to acknowledge their victory. That laughter slices deeper than words because it reduces their control to nothing. It tells them they no longer matter, that their illusions of dominance are dead. They tried to bury you under shame, yet you laughed your way out of the grave. And now, each time you laugh, it is a funeral march for the power they once believed they had. In relationships, your laughter becomes the cruelest form of truth. They expected you to mourn their absence, to fold when they left, to beg for the comfort of their presence. They believed you would stay attached to the illusion of them, but your laughter shattered that illusion. It wasn't just survival. It was joy, genuine joy without their weight. To them, that joy is cruelty because it exposes how replaceable they were. To you, it is freedom because it proves you are not bound by anyone's hand. They thought you were their creation. Your laugh reminded them you were your own. Psychology teaches that laughter from freedom has a unique sting because it communicates detachment. They crave relevance, they crave to know they left marks that linger, but your laughter shows them they became irrelevant to your story. They cannot accept that you live without carrying their shadow. They wanted to remain the ghost in your mind, but instead you laughed the ghost out of existence. The cruelty is not in the sound. It is in what the sound represents. It represents the destruction of the illusion that they were permanent. Your freedom erased their importance, and your laughter made it public.